Chapter 66 Setting Array Formation. After Maximus decided to set up the artificial array, he first looked up the jade slip for the materials needed for the artificial array. He let his spiritual consciousness in the jade slip of the architectural blueprint that was generated yesterday. Materials needed: small magic crystal vein, ethercore nexus, void stone dust, spectral sentinel probe, blue spirit grass seed. Looking at the list, the first item was the small magic crystal vein. The magic crystal vein is the core of the mine that gathers and condensed magic crystals. He thought that the magic crystal mine would be abandoned, but it seemed useful for the formation array. Magic crystal veins were not listed for sale in the system mall since they were naturally formed by the world with its original laws. However, extracting the magic crystal vein from the mine was difficult as it naturally formed to gather and crystallize mana through the laws of the world. Moving it would disrupt the magic crystal vein and assimilate it into the world, stopping the production of magic crystals. Only those proficient in manipulating laws, like Tier 9 mages or knights, could do it. Moreover, they could also create an artificial magic crystal mine. This is also why Tier 9 beings theoretically have infinite money, as with the help of mana and the laws they have mastered, they can create anything. Now the problem was that Maximus didn't have a Tier 9 being to help him move the mine, so he could only look for help from the system. After browsing for a while, he came up with a solution. Mana Vein Extractor can perfectly extract any size and quality of mana vein without damaging it. Price: 10 million top-grade magic crystals. That was worth over 10 quadrillion GP, which was insane. The price, although expensive, was reasonable since anything that touched the law was worth millions of top-grade magic crystals. If low to high-grade magic crystals were the crystallization of mana, then top-grade magic crystals were the crystallization of law. Moreover, only a source world magic crystal mine could gather enough law for it to crystallize into top-grade magic crystals. So, even though Tier 9 beings could create artificial veins to crystallize mana, they were only theoretically rich. As top magic crystal was the only currency they accepted when trading for Tier 9 items. However, although items that touched the law were expensive, knowledge about it was much cheaper, costing only 100 to 1,000 top-grade crystals. But still, the price of the mana vein extractor was insane and he couldn't afford it. Luckily, similar to Methamorph architecture, he could just pay for each use without buying it as a whole. Still, the price for moving and extracting each small magic crystal vein cost 1 billion GP, which was equal to one top-grade magic crystal. And according to the architectural blueprint, the more magic crystal veins there were, the more mana it would gather, with a maximum of 100 magic crystal veins needed to reach a peak Tier 3 mana environment. There were a total of 83 magic crystal veins in the whole Sunburnt Plateau alone. So, moving 83 magic crystal veins would cost 83 billion GP. As for the second material, it was the ethercore nexus, the main processor or the brain of the formation array. It was quite cheap, costing only 100 million GP for one Tier 3 ethercore nexus. However, what he needed was one mothercore ethercore nexus, which cost 10 billion GP, and 100 ethercore nexus units. This totaled 20 billion GP. The third material was void stone dust, which would integrate into the void, forming the connection to the array of materials. He needed a total of 1,000 tons of it, costing another 10 billion GP. The fourth material was the spectral sentinel probe, which would function as the data receiver and monitoring probe for the array. He needed 100,000 pieces of it, costing 1 billion GP. The fifth material was the blue spirit grass seed, which would purify the corrosive properties of the mana. He needed a large quantity to spread all over the range of the formation, which was 10 million kilometers of land, costing 10 billion GP. As for the miscellaneous materials required, they also cost 3 billion GP. All in all, for the materials alone, he needed more or less 127 billion GP. With the cost of the beast pets for his children, using the metamorph architecture, reserving GP for upgrading the talents of his wives and children to legendary, and the materials for the artificial formation, he only had less than 200 million low magic crystals left from the 489 million low magic crystals he borrowed from the EGCC. With a sigh, he bought all the needed materials and stored them in his storage ring as he boarded his flying boat. While Maximus was setting up the artificial formation array, the great relocation was underway. In the previous territory of Ferris Helmsworth, which was the nearest kingdom to the Moonlight Kingdom, 100 enormous flying vessels were parked outside the capital city. Landon walked out of the ship and looked at the city in front of him. This will be the first city to be relocated, Landon cheered himself. With the opening of the gates, Landon looked at the curious citizens watching them. Before their departure, he already sent a notice to the branch of Etheria Pavilion to inform people to avoid confusion and panic. Walking in front of the people, he used mana to amplify his voice. "People, as you know, His Majesty planned to move all of you in Moonlight King Dash." Before he could finish speaking, some citizens interrupted him. "I will not move. This has been my home for decades, and I will not leave for some bullshit kingdom," one of them yelled. Landon paused for a second, realizing that relocation was not an easy decision for them. "If it were you, would you be happy if some stranger told you to move to a new house that you knew nothing about?" These people didn't even know if all of this was real, if their king had truly left them. It had only been a week since Maximus negotiated with Ferris, so it was understandable. Even though Ferris had informed his ministers and guards about the change in rule and that he was leaving, many people still didn't believe it. It was too abrupt. Perhaps this wouldn't be a problem in a few months, but it had only been a week, and they still felt like they were dreaming. "Don't worry, we will guarantee your food, housing, and clothing and provide you with satisfactory work that will fill your stomachs," Landon thought for a while and said. As he said that, some people were moved, especially the farmers and hard workers. With the opening of the Etheria Pavilion, they could barely pay taxes as they needed to sell their crops at lower prices than the pavilion. Even the previous king didn't care much about them, as they only came here to recruit talents and to mine resources. Some rulers of other kingdoms were even grateful to the Etheria Pavilion as they can just spend some mortal money to feed their people. They just needed the common people to give birth and increase the chance of talented individuals appearing. As for the mortal money, they were just for the nobles who were greedy for mortal pleasure. For these rulers, it's for the contribution points that they can get for every talented individual they recruit for their family. So although the common people suffered from the opening of the Etheria Pavilion, they would not die from hunger, as their king would not allow that from happening. Moreover, Etheria Pavilion offered discounts to these affected farmers and even provided other jobs. But it was limited after all, and not everyone could have those jobs. So when Landon said that they would provide for all their needs and even offer satisfactory jobs, they were moved. As for those who had been working for the Etheria Pavilion for a while, they didn't have much resistance to moving to the Moonlight Kingdom. They already knew a bit about the kingdom, so they weren't completely clueless and were even a bit excited about the move. "Today, about 100,000 of you can board the ship. For those who are undecided, you can wait until tomorrow or the day after," Landon announced. "If by then you still choose not to move with me, I'm sorry, but you will be left behind. The Etheria Pavilion will also be leaving, so don't take any chances," Landon said with a serious tone. Most of the farmers had already stopped farming, so most of them rely on the Etheria Pavilion for food. "Now, for those who want to leave now, you have 1 hour to prepare." Landon waved his hand and dismissed them. Soon, people started heading home and began packing what they could bring. The poor and hungry had no choice but to leave as they sought a better life. The workers of the Etheria Pavilion were excited and couldn't wait to relocate. Some smart individuals even saw this as an opportunity to change their life against the sky. The most reluctant ones were the nobles. They were the ones most against the relocation because all their wealth was tied to their land. Some even contemplated forcing others to stay so they could continue enjoying their lavish lifestyles and live like kings. However, the soldiers of the previous king had been incorporated into Maximus' army and were instructed to watch these nobles not to do anything funny. These reluctant nobles could only sigh in sadness. After all, without people to serve them, were they still nobles? Without people, were the wealthy still wealthy if their money couldn't buy anything? Chapter 67: Activating the Array. More than a month later, in the hidden underground base at Maximus' castle, Maximus placed the Ethercore Nexus, the last piece needed to activate the array. After putting it in the center and arranging runes made of void stone dust, the whole kingdom suddenly lit up. In one of the restaurants, Kevin saw the whole world suddenly light up. This happened in just a few milliseconds, so Kevin thought he was hallucinating. "Did you see that?" Kevin said as he dropped the food that he was eating. The person sitting beside him simply nodded with a bewildered expression. After confirming that he was not dreaming, continued to think about what just happened. When suddenly, the magic particles in the atmosphere suddenly gathered, becoming purer and denser. He suddenly breathed in. It felt as if everything suddenly became bright, full of colors. He felt like he was bathing in a spring, like a newborn baby. "What just happened?" he murmured. Kevin even felt his headache suddenly gone. In a good mood, he decided to indulge and eat until he vomited to celebrate this phenomenon. Waiter! Bring me your most expensive set. In one of the houses, an elderly man was on the verge of dying due to old age. Old man, don't die just yet, cried one of his sons. This is just how life is. One day, it will be your turn. The old man smiled with a wrinkled face as if he was about to run out of breath. Sob, Grandpa, I will miss you, his grandson cried as he held his hand. What's happening to Grandpa? A clueless little girl said, her eyes red from the somber atmosphere despite not knowing what is really happening. Your grandpa is already old and tired, so he needed to rest, her mother said, trying to offer comfort. Ha ha ha, indeed I'm already 55 this year, the oldest in our district. You should be proud of me, little girl, a long-lived species. The only man said, he laughed nearly out of breath, proud of his achievements. Normal people only have an average lifespan of 40 years old due to the corrosive manna in the atmosphere. So the old man is indeed right to be proud as he has lived another decade. But just as the old man was about to close his eyes for a final farewell, a blinding light shone brightly in the sky. The old man squinted his eyes for a while and suddenly felt a long-lost feeling of vitality in his body. His wrinkled face also started to plump up as if he was getting younger. Usually, in such a manna-laden environment, it would be easy for people to reach the age of 70s or 80s, but the corrosive manna had the opposite effect, decreasing their lifespan. However, with the activation of the formation, the manna became denser and somewhat purer, rejuvenating the old man. The old man's relatives were also shocked by the change, as they felt this strange energy and sensed that everything suddenly became colorful. Grandpa became a ghost. The little girl was shocked and scared as she witnessed the transformation of her grandpa. This brought the family back to reality as they felt the changes in their own bodies. What just happened? One of them said. On the other hand, the old man on his deathbed suddenly got up. Though his skin was still wrinkled, a hint of vitality could be seen in his eyes. Ha ha ha. I'm alive again, the old man exclaimed excitedly. The old man didn't know what had happened, but he was very excited about it. He could continue being the oldest person in their district and boast about it to his old pals who were younger than him for a few more years. Oh. Grandpa is going to eat us. The little girl screamed and ran away in fear as he saw his grandpa suddenly change and laugh weirdly. Meanwhile, Maximus, who had just set up the formation, felt the changes in the atmosphere more clearly. In just a few seconds, the manna intensity doubled in magnitude. If the manna environment was previously at tier 0.2, it now jumped to 0.6 instantly. And this manna intensity would continue to grow until it reached a tier 3 manna environment. He could also sense the corrosive properties of manna slowly disappearing. He reckoned that they would completely vanish once the manna environment reached tier 1 and the blue spirit bluegrass fully grew. Satisfied with the effects of his painstaking work over the past month and the billions of GP spent, he turned his attention to the ethercore nexus. This was the main brain of the formation array, and he even supplemented it with one top-grade magic crystal, which should be enough to power it for a year. A virtual screen pops up after inputting his spiritual and mana signature to brand it as his own. Highest authority, Maximus Shadowcrest. Mana density, tier 0.7. Defense and attack, charge 0%. Functions, monitoring, virtualize, recording, alarm. Connection not set. The mana density displayed the current mana intensity. As for the defense and attack, he cited yet another expense. He still needed to use magic crystals to charge it up, but he guessed that once more mana was gathered, it would automatically charge using the mana in the atmosphere. As for the monitoring function, it proved quite convenient. He tried clicking on Virtualize and suddenly, a sand table version of his kingdom was displayed. It even provided a live feed. He could zoom in and out and even hear sounds if he liked. It was like the peeping crystal in the anime he watched from his previous life but more advanced. He also tried filtering the mana intensity of individuals. Upon doing so, he saw several readings of Tier 3 Earth Knights and a lot of Tier 1 official mages. As for Tier 2 Great Mages, there were only a few, including his wives and Isabel, whom he hadn't married yet. As for others or those above that level, he saw none of them. Perhaps because the range is only in the formation array or they had already escaped to another place far from the Sunburnt Plateau. As traveling has become quite easy these days as long as one had money, thanks to the existence of EGCC everywhere. After having fun with the virtualized map for a while, Maximus turned his attention to the connection function. Upon clicking to see what he could connect with, another tab appeared. Connect to 5 million plus tokens. Mana scanner. Databases. Communication Jade. In essence, he could connect to anything that stored and transferred data. As for the 5 million plus tokens, after more than a month, the grand relocation brought over 3 million people into his territory. Once they arrived, they registered their identity tokens, just like the previous citizens. Maximus decided to connect them all to the Ethercore Nexus since he had the highest authority, and he can rest assured that it was very private, only available to him. Loading. Complete. Once he connected everything, all of the tokens suddenly vibrated. Earlier, Kevin felt the sudden change in his surroundings and his body. Now there is another anomaly again. What's happening this time? Kevin reached out for his token, which had started vibrating. All the people in the Moonlight Kingdom were required to carry the token at all times as part of the protocol, or so they said. When the token identification system was implemented, many were curious about its purpose, as it required all kinds of information. It even required some weird things that Kevin didn't understand. He had heard that it was for spirit and mana signatures. Initially, he was puzzled, but when a strange device touched him, he felt like all his essence was being sucked out. Fortunately, he recovered the next day, or else he wouldn't have known who would manage his spice business. Until now, he still didn't know the full extent of the token's use, except for identification. Taking out the token from his pocket, he saw a virtual screen pop out, which surprised him a little bit. Personal information. Waiting for updates. Waiting for updates? Kevin murmured. For personal information, he was aware of it, as every time he went to another place in the kingdom, he needed to scan his token to enter, which displayed his personal information such as his origin, age, and history. But what did awaiting for updates mean? Was there another function of this thing? Whatever, he murmured as he put the token on the table and continued eating. On the other hand, Maximus was tinkering with the connection function, contemplating what he could do with it. He focused on the token and realized he could create a rune code to input various functions into the token, such as a banking system, chatting system, or even virtual games if he can. Fortunately, he could buy these rune programs in the system mall. He just had to manually input them, otherwise, he didn't know what else to do. What should I add first? He questioned. Chapter 68 Choosing the First Function. In the hidden basement of the castle, Maximus contemplated which function to add first to the token. Even though he could buy runic programs, he still had to input them manually, which can take weeks. Instant installation wasn't possible, so choosing the initial function was crucial. He initially considered a banking system program but realized there was no bank in his territory. While banking had been popularized in prosperous areas where the EGCC was stationed, but his territory was just beginning to take shape. The only place in Sunburnt Plateau that have a bank is Birun City, which primarily handles the exchange of gold coins and magic crystal. Moreover, you can't even withdraw from it. If he needed money, he can only go to Elnor Island or other prosperous places in the Cursed Continent. The reason EGCC handle gold coins and magic crystal exchange is that the metal currency they minted is universally accepted, and you can convert it to magic crystal directly. While it was possible to create one in currency, it could only be used locally and couldn't be used for trade in other places. Counterfeiting was also out of the question, as the minted gold coins distributed by the EGCC were specially processed. One might wonder why a faction as influential as the EGCC still needed mortal currency. Well, magic crystals were the main currency used exclusively by mages and knights. But what about the common people? Although on the Arcane Continent, they could at least become official mages or knights when they grew up, that required at least rank 2 uncommon talent. The chances of that happening, even in a mana-rich environment like the Arcane Continent, were only 1 in 3 people. For the remaining 70%, they would remain mediocre their entire lives without a change of fate or a lot of money. Considering the population of at least billions of trillions on the Arcane Continent, what currency did this 70% of the population use? They couldn't use magic crystals, as they were also crucial resources for cultivation. This is where the EGCC gold and metal currency came into play. After all, currency wasn't just about making people rich, but also about circulating resources. So, even though gold or certain metals might be considered worthless, they still served as currency, specifically the ones minted by the EGCC. He crossed out the banking system for now since without a physical station, it wouldn't work. Although it was his main plan to popularize digital currency and cultivate its sentimental value and exchange in the system, he still needed to build a physical station for it. He estimated it would take at least a month to get it roughly done. However, before that, the first function he considered was a forum or chatting program. While it might not offer immediate benefits on the surface, it would become his most powerful tool to influence the minds of his people. After all, he had just conquered them and relocated them to this place. There might be hidden resentment among them, which could become a ticking time bomb in the future. But with the forum function, he could subtly feed them his thoughts and indoctrinate them without their knowledge. Additionally, it would serve as a useful propaganda tool when he started implementing changes in the future. Clicking into the system mall, he searched for runic system programs related to forums and messaging. What appeared were different runic languages that he wasn't familiar with. The options were as follows. Eldirune, the oldest runic language from the era of Titans and ancient dragons, mainly used by Ents as a building block for their roots. Due to its ancientness, it had become a forgotten runic language, making it harder to decipher. Click to customize a runic program. Arcana Script, the most popular runic language, known for its easy-to-complex patterns, making it extremely versatile and adaptable to any runic device. Click to customize a runic program. Runic Tongue, the easiest runic language to learn, utilizing spoken or written language to imbue the runic program. Click to customize a runic program. After browsing through the available options, Maximus narrowed down his choices to 3 types of runic programs: Eldirune, Arcana Script, and Runic Tongue. The Eldirune was the most secure option but also the most expensive, which wasn't a concern for him as he could afford it. However, it was the most challenging runic language to inscribe, with highly complicated runes that made him feel dizzy just looking at them. The Arcana Script, on the other hand, was average in terms of price, difficulty, and protection. However, it was versatile enough that even if he wanted to add other runic languages in the future, it would still function. Lastly, the Runic Tongue was the simplest and cheapest option available. It's so simple that he only need written or spoken language in a specific frequency to inscribe. Moreover, it required less than a tenth of the time to inscribe. Although easy to operate, it lacked strong protection, making it vulnerable to potential attacks. Maximus decided to cross it off his list. After much thought, he chose the Eldirune primarily due to its superior protection. He knew that with the Arcana Script, he could easily change it later if he had the time. However, since he's doing it anyway, why not go all out? Clicking on the Customization tab, he implemented several main functions and miscellaneous features that he liked, based on the forum and messaging apps from his previous life. After confirming his choices and paying the cost of 165 million GP, he patiently waited for a while until a jade slip materialized in his hands. Satisfied, he temporarily stored it in his storage ring. Maximus badly needed rest. Setting up the array without food and sleep for a month had taken a toll on his spirit. Although he could go without food and sleep for a year by just absorbing mana, he was accustomed to extravagance, reveling in richness and beauty. A month of emotionless and concentrated work had left him feeling fatigued. As for why he couldn't rest while setting up the formation, it was because once he started he couldn't stop. The consumable materials, such as void stone dust, would vanish without a connection to the formation, so he had to hurry and complete the formation array. The next day, in one of the bedrooms of the castle, Maximus was sleeping soundly on his bed. Outside the door, 3 little girls were carefully opening the door to his room. "Be careful, you might wake up Dad," Lily cautioned her 2 sisters, upon seeing Lila already giggling. The 2 nodded and followed her lead, walking on their toes. Maximus, in his castle, felt safe and at home, especially with multiple array formations enhancing security. Earlier, when he returned from the Arcane Continent with hundreds of billion GP, he splurged and bought multiple Tier 6 formation arrays to strengthen the castle's defenses. So it's understandable that he still sleeps soundly, without much awareness of his surroundings. Once the little girls reached the side of the bed, Lila attempted to poke his father's cheek, who was still sleeping. They were planning to play a prank on their father. "What do we do now?" Lila asked in a whisper, looking at Lily and Lydia. "Should we cover his nose?" Lila asked. "No, that's bad." Lydia, who was silent, shook her head. "I know." Lily then shared her plan with her sisters in a whisper. Maximus suddenly felt something poking him on the side of his stomach, which caused him to wake up. To his surprise, he found his 3 daughters trying to tickle him. Caught off guard by their actions, the girls couldn't hold back their laughter any longer. Ha ha ha. How dare you? Maximus playfully yelled and attacked them in return, tickling them back. Ha ha ha. The three tried to run away, but it was futile. No more, no more, they begged. Maximus stopped and gave them a hug and a kiss on their cheeks. Good morning, he said warmly. Good morning too, Daddy. Lila and Lydia replied. Good morning, Dad. Lily added. Curious, Maximus asked, where are your mothers? As he couldn't see them in the room. They are cooking. They knew you came back last night and planned to have a sumptuous breakfast, Lily explained. And your brothers? Mimi, I know. Lila raised her hand as if she were reciting. Go on, Maximus nodded, amused. They are playing with Zaire, Noir, and Banana. Lila excitedly explained. Who are those? Maximus asked, feeling puzzled. It's the lion, panther, and monkey you gave us, Daddy. Oh, Maximus realized. After his return, he had only spent about 2 days with his family before leaving for his task of talking to other rulers. Then, he had come back briefly and immediately started setting up the formation, so he wasn't aware that their pets were already named. What about yours? Where are your pets? We left them with our mothers and came to see you, Lily explained. Then let's go have breakfast, Maximus said, enjoying the morning with his beloved daughters. Chapitre 69 Moonlight Forum. 2 weeks later, in the underground hidden basement, Maximus let out a sigh of relief as he gazed at the finished runic program he had inscribed. During these 2 weeks, he had taken his time and hadn't rushed through the process. He even managed to rest and spend quality time with his family, unlike when he was setting up the formation array and felt exhausted like a dog. Although the process of inscribing consumes a lot of time, it also aided his study of mechanics, particularly in control and precision when inscribing runic patterns. Working with the challenging Eldirun runic language tested his patience and precision, ultimately leading to improved control over his mana. Shifting his attention to the Ethercore Nexus, he noticed a new function that had been added. Highest Authority, Maximus Shadowcrest. Mana Density, Tier 1.7. Defense and Attack, Charged, 100%. Functions, Virtualization, Recording, Alarm. Connection, Token, Personal Information. Moonlight Forum? Once the mana density reached Tier 1, the mana gathering process started to slow down. So, it would likely take another 2 weeks to achieve Tier 2 mana density. The Moonlight Forum had basic functions such as posting, commenting, and liking. It also had a chat feature and the ability to add friends. Maximus intentionally avoided adding too many functions at once to prevent confusion. However, the runic program is already finished, any future updates could be easily made with just a single click. Before enabling the Moonlight Forum, Maximus typed his first post in instructions. In Isabella's boudoir, she was getting ready for the day when suddenly her token started vibrating. Intrigued, she picked it up. Personal information. Moonlight Forum? Moonlight Forum? Isabella voiced her confusion. Weeks ago, they had been informed by Maximus about the changes happening in the kingdom, such as the mana density and purity being attributed to the formation. It had even caused her mana, which had long been stagnant, to move. While most of the ministers were shocked by such a change, they had no doubts about it, especially since Maximus had mentioned that his Tier 5 mage teacher planned to make Sunburnt Plateau his territory. Curiosity piqued, Isabella tapped on the Moonlight Forum. Forum. Sha. Profile. There wasn't much content on the forum, except for Maximus' announcements explaining what had happened in the past week and outlining the functions of the Moonlight Forum. Clicking on the chat tab, she found that it was empty. Let's see. According to the instructions, she could add anyone by typing their name. She typed a Maximus, and several names popped up. So she added his surname. Maximus Shadowcrest. Done. Isabella clicked on Add A and anxiously waited for Maximus to accept. While waiting, she turned to the Profile tab. Since everyone with a token had already registered their personal information, there was no need for her to do so. Unfortunately, all the profiles were blank and held no interesting information. However, Isabella was curious about the camera function. Maximus had explained in his post that it was like a photo stone, capable of capturing images using mana. When she clicked on it, a pop-up appeared. Please input mana. After inputting the mana, her face appeared on the virtual screen. Oops! Isabella hurriedly cut off the supply of mana. She had just seen her face so clearly for the first time. Although mirrors existed in this world, they weren't as clear as the image displayed on the token. Turning the mana supply back on, Isabella marveled at the highly detailed image. Beautiful, she murmured unconsciously. Humph, this old lady is so beautiful. How can that lustful man endure my charm? Isabella remarked in a sour tone as she looked at her reflection. It had been almost a year since Isabella surrendered under Maximus' rule. Initially, upon discovering that he had many wives, she somewhat accepted the possibility of being in a similar situation. For the sake of her path as a mage, she was willing to endure this temporary humiliation, especially since Maximus was not bad-looking and was also a talented mage. However, Maximus had treated her like any other person, making her doubt her charm. Yet, now, as she gazed at her image reflected in the virtual screen, even she, a woman, was almost charmed by her beauty. So how could a lustful man resist it? Could it be that I'm too old? Isabella touched her face. No. How can I be old? Isabella quickly refuted herself. She was only 31 years old this year, and as a Tier 2 great mage, she had a lifespan of at least 300 years. Moreover, there was a high chance that she could advance to Tier 3 nascent mage, extending her lifespan to 1,000 years. Deciding not to dwell on it any longer, she put away her token and confidently walked out of the house. 2 weeks later, the Moonlight forum was abuzz with excitement. Originally, many people didn't understand how the forum worked, and some couldn't even read. But Maximus had anticipated this and added a voice function. Instead of reading the text, the forum now played the voice of the post owner. This was made possible because the user's mana and spiritual signature were registered in their tokens and with a little processing through the Ethercore nexus. Making a personal generated voice was easy. In the newly built tavern, a man with silver hair named Silver Adam sat in a chair behind the counter, enjoying his drink while tinkering with his token. He let out a sigh, appreciating the taste of the wine. Silver Adam was a Tier 4 Sky Knight who had chosen not to escape like the others when he learned that the entire Sunburnt Plateau had been conquered. He had grown tired of living life on the edge of a knife, constantly either fighting or on his way to a battle. Landon, the lad responsible for the relocation, had bribed him with good wine and spirits. Silver Adam was known as Drunken Sword Silver and had traveled all over the world in search of drinks that could satisfy him. There was even a time when he sold himself as a servant to a family famous for their wines, solely because they claimed to have wines that were out of this world. Unfortunately, they had deceived him, an old fool, into a soulbound contract. Naively believing them, he signed the contract and then asked where the promised wine was. To his dismay, the group simply laughed at him. How could he be worthy of the title Drunken Sword Silver if he had a sober mind? Disregarding the contract, he went on a rampage and nearly exterminated their entire family. However, as a punishment for breaking the contract, the dignified Tier 6 Stellar Knight regressed to a Tier 4 Sky Knight. Helpless, he could only escape to the Cursed Continent, where he now lived his retired life, unable to advance further due to the punishment of the contract. Maximus had heard about Silver Adam's story from Ferris when he inquired about powerful or hidden hermits in the Sunburnt Plateau. Learning about the pitiful drunkard, Maximus purchased the strongest Tier 6 wine available in the system mall and had Landon bribe him. Although the old man had regressed in strength, his knowledge and experience were still formidable. With ease, he could cross realms and defeat Tier 5 knights or even mages if caught off guard. Precisely because of this, Maximus planned to have the old man become the teacher of the Knight Academy he was planning to establish. But for now, Old Silver was content managing the tavern according to his own desires. "Old Silver, give me the usual," shouted a middle-aged man who had just entered the tavern. "Go get it yourself," Old Silver replied without raising his head, engrossed in his token. "What are you doing, Old Silver?" the middle-aged man asked as he walked up to him. As the middle-aged man came behind him, he saw Old Silver typing on the virtual screen under the nickname Drunken Sword Silver. "Oh, it's you, the old man who has been famous recently." The middle-aged man's eyes shone as if he had encountered a celebrity. Drunken Sword Silver had gained recent fame on the Moonlight forum, sharing his daring and thrilling adventures. However, many people didn't believe his stories and considered them to be fictional due to their fantastical nature. "Is what you said real, Old Silver?" the middle-aged man drooled as he read what was posted. "Of course," Old Silver proudly replied. What he had shared were his adventures in the gourmet domain, the territory of a Tier 9 mage that was also a Tier 9 gastronomancer. In this domain, the entire world had been transformed into edible food. Even the dirt could be eaten, with different types offering flavors ranging from sour and sweet to savory and more. Old Silver had embarked on this adventure in pursuit of the beer waterfall at one time. But his dream is to have a taste of the ultimate treasure, the mystic dew of the gods. The formation of this legendary drop of wine only occurred once every 1,000 years and was fought over by many powerhouses ranging from Tier 6 to Tier 7. Unfortunately, before he could achieve his goals, he was deceived and could no longer advance. Just thinking about that legendary drop of wine, Old Silver couldn't help but drool and sigh. Chapter 70 Moonlight Bank, Moonlight Library. In the tavern, Silver Adam typed about his adventures in the Moonlight Forum, sharing the wonders he had witnessed during his years in the Arcane Continent. He described the world of swords, where everything was sharp and infused with the essence of sword law. It was said that merely staying there could grant enlightenment on the path of the sword. He also recounted the music paradise, a forbidden domain that was both a paradise and a source of fascination. Even the gentlest sound of the wind could mesmerize those who heard it. Among the stories he shared, there was the domain of treasured spirits, where every living being held a treasure within, awakening their spirits. These incredible tales captivated the people of the Moonlight Kingdom, leaving them dreaming and yearning for more. As Silver Adam basked in the attention he was receiving, taking a sip of his favorite wine, his token vibrated, indicating a new update. Personal information. Moonlight Forum. Moonlight Library. Moonlight Bank. Moonlight Library? Moonlight Bank? 3 days later, a line of people could be seen forming in front of a newly built establishment called Moonlight Bank. Among them was Alistair, a 15-year-old teenager who worked in construction. His sister, Amara, who was only 5 years old, asked him, "Brother, what are we doing here?" "We are here to borrow money," Alistair explained. 3 days ago, when the Moonlight Bank and Moonlight Library were updated in the token, it caused a sensation. While the Moonlight Forum had also generated excitement, it was primarily seen as entertainment. However, the Moonlight Bank and Moonlight Library were directly related to people's futures. For example, Moonlight Bank allowed individuals to deposit their money and earn an interest rate of 3% per month. However, this offer wasn't particularly attractive to the majority of people, as most of them struggled to make ends meet and didn't have spare money to deposit. As for those who did have money, such as merchants, they were skeptical about entrusting their funds to a newly established bank. This is where the Moonlight Library came into play, becoming the catalyst for the frenzy. The library contained comprehensive knowledge, ranging from mage cultivation and knight training to professional knowledge and even magical blueprints. Of course, Maximus didn't sell advanced knowledge beyond Tier 1. Once people saw the wealth of knowledge within the Moonlight Library, a frenzy ensued. People from all walks of life, from poor beggars to wealthy merchants, clamored to access the library. Even the nobles, who initially scorned the Moonlight Bank as a means to exploit their wealth, were drawn in. The reason was simple: to purchase the knowledge from the library, one needed Moonlight credits, which were digital currency obtained by depositing money into the bank. Moonlight credits were divided into 3 tiers: copper credits, silver credits, and gold credits. Hence, even after 3 days, the lines at physical bank branches across the kingdom showed no sign of ending. After all, who wouldn't want to become a powerful mage or knight? Which merchant wouldn't want to expand their business? The sight of various blueprints alone made their mouths water with visions of a bright future. Even the nobles, though they possessed hereditary privileges, recognized their own deficiencies and sought to improve themselves. With the comprehensive inheritance available in the Moonlight Library, many hoped to consolidate their status and one day stand tall. Others simply aimed to preserve their power, for even commoners had the opportunity to train and become knights or mages, so the nobles couldn't afford to lag behind. As for how the poor commoners could afford to purchase these inheritances, the answer was borrowing from the bank. Borrow? Are we out of food? Amara's eyes reddened, thinking they were going back to being hungry again. After relocating to the Moonlight Kingdom, Alistair managed to secure a job at a construction site. Their days had been filled with happiness, being able to eat the food they liked. Although they couldn't indulge themselves extravagantly, it was enough for Amara. "No, of course not. I'm here to borrow money to buy a training manual," Alistair said resolutely. Alistair was tired of constantly relying on others for survival. Their entire lives had been spent at the mercy of others. Although he had tried to change their circumstances, he was unfortunately weak, and most importantly, he is dull-witted. It wasn't that Alistair had a mental impairment, but whenever he tried to learn something, there was always a distraction. It felt as though he shouldn't learn those things, as if his heart was telling him it wasn't his destiny and that he shouldn't waste time on them. But until now, he still didn't understand the reason behind it all. All he knew was that when it came to swords, he felt immense joy, and learning about them came effortlessly, as if everything became as simple as 1 + 1. Unfortunately, he hadn't yet come across a knight training manual that specialized in swords. Most of them focused on strengthening the body or specialized in other weapons. He had come to borrow money to find out if there was truly something special between him and swords. After waiting for nearly half a day, it was finally their turn. A receptionist greeted them with a smile and asked, "Hello, deposit or loan?" "Loan, please," Alistair replied seriously. "Please put your identity token here," the receptionist instructed, pointing to the oddly shaped device. Alistair followed the instructions and placed his token inside. After a moment, it lit up, and a virtual panel appeared in front of the receptionist. Alistair couldn't see the details clearly as they appeared blurred in his view. "Mr. Alistair, you can borrow 1,000 gold credits at 10% annual interest," the receptionist said, sounding somewhat shocked. The people behind them who were also taking out loans were equally astonished. Most borrowers could only obtain a maximum of 10 gold credits. But this young lad could borrow up to 1,000 gold credits? Alistair wasn't too overwhelmed by the amount of money since his monthly salary was equivalent to 1 gold coin. Due to his immense strength, he could perform the work of more than 30 men at the ongoing construction site of the kingdom. If he didn't urgently need money, he wouldn't have even considered taking out a loan. Before relocating to this place, he was very weak, as if deprived of all nutrients. Despite his proficiency with the sword, it was rendered useless by his weak body. As a result, he had to rely on the provisions of others. However, since arriving in this place less than a month ago, something strange happened. His body seemed to absorb the surrounding energy like a sponge. His previously weak and malnourished physique transformed into a handsome and tall one, almost catching to that of a knight. Moreover, whenever he engaged in training and swung the sword, a mysterious force would enter his body, further enhancing his strength. This was why he felt excited about purchasing formal sword manuals. After all, with just blindly training, he had already achieved significant improvements. He could only imagine the possibilities that formal training would unlock. Now, after obtaining the loan, he was eager to acquire the sword training manual without delay. Maximus, in the castle's hidden underground chamber, was engrossed in scribing runic patterns when he was alarmed by the notification of OVERPOWERED. Intrigued, he turned his attention to see what had happened. The notification displayed, "Detected rank 9 primordial potential, sword spirit body, sealed."
What?
Maximus exclaimed in surprise. Was he dreaming? What did rank 9 potential mean? It meant that as long as one didn't die, they could be promoted to tier 9, even while sleeping with sufficient mana. You see, in the vast population of the arcane continent, with billions of trillions of individuals, there were only slightly over 1,000 known tier 9 beings. And yet, there was a hidden dragon in his small pond? Maximus clicked on all of Alistair's registered life experiences stored in his token. Is this a protagonist? Maximus unconsciously muttered to himself as he discovered that Alistair's life experiences perfectly matched the template of a protagonist. No parents?
Check.
Poverty?
Check.
Handsome?
Check.
Having a sister?
Check.
All of Alistair's life experiences coincided with the template of a protagonist. What is this sealed state? He questioned himself, knowing full well that no one was going to provide an answer. After being lost in thought for a while, Maximus edited the approved loan to 1,000 gold credits. The device that scanned the token to evaluate the amount of credit one could borrow was merely a disguise. Its main purpose was to scan the mana and spirit signature in the token to assess one's potential. As for evaluating the amount of credit one could borrow, the Ethercore Nexus could easily handle that task. Evaluating honesty, income, spending habits, and other factors was a piece of cake for it to calculate. However, assessing talent required a special device. After approving the loan of 1,000 credits, Maximus sighed at the tricks of fate. His former self, who had been born into wealth, possessed nothing but trash talent. Meanwhile, others who had struggled their entire lives were originally destined for greatness. Was being the son of destiny destined to be a life of suffering? Fortunately, Maximus was not in that predicament. He was a transmigrator, armed with a cheat, and he was very satisfied with it. After all, he only needed to remain steady, and he could achieve everything he desired.